Golden Kamuy. I will say the first season's a bit stodgy with the animation. The bear
is awful, man. The bear
bear.
is awful.
The first time you see the bear, I was like, what the fuck is that?
Like the bear from Tekken. Like.
Honestly.
No, Ben, no. Sorry.
Gentle Ben.
Gentle Ben.
No, Ben, no!
Hello, and welcome back to Gateway to Anime. How are you all? What's going on, Charlie? How you going?
Hi, good. Welcome back. We're here, episode 2. Pretty of a fun one, kind of. We'll get into it in a second.
Graham, how are you before we get into what this episode's all about?
I am ready to learn, Sam.
Good. I'm glad, Graham. That's good because everyone playing along at home, when I pitched this episode, Charlotte's like, fucking boring, bro. And I was like, excuse me? History is fun, everyone, and I'm going to prove it all to you today. Basically, what we're going to talk about here is historical fiction anime. Now, this is an interesting genre. Let me explain what historical fiction actually is, because how does it differ from a period piece,
Oh, we're
for
going
example?
that deep.
Oh, we're going that deep.
Hang on. I just need to go back to your impersonation of me. Like I was like some 1980s jock, like bullying you, like in the school
Hey,
hallway.
nerd.
Hey there, loser. Like history's for
Pretty
dweebs,
much
like,
that's how I remember the meeting going.
Yeah, it was pretty accurate.
Dragging on your cord, man.
I think that obviously there's some great anime in this genre, and I just want to like stand up for myself. Everyone thinks I'm a total like bimbo, but I genuinely was just like, hey Sam, we might need to change the title because it's not super clickable. And Sam was like, let's open the season with my favorite topic, historical fiction. And I went, man, we're a pretty low key podcast, but sure. But you know,
We ain't scraping the bottom of the barrel at all.
but I have to say that the shows that we've all picked and what we're talking about are all top tier.
Yeah.
So any excuse that I get to talk about what I'm going to talk about, I will take. And you know what? If it has to be in the historical fiction episode, then so be it. So let's get into it.
Also, for those of you watching as opposed to listening, I am repping what you can see a Gateway to Anime shirt. They exist. They're pretty cool.
They're also not for sale, so I don't know why you're...
Yeah, why are you repping
They
them?
might be soon. They might be soon, if you're lucky.
Look at this shirt that you can't buy.
This shirt that you can't ever.
Maybe if we get a few more Patreon.
One day down the line, these shirts will be available for sale, but at the moment, untenable, but they're pretty cool, right? Anyway, let's talk about historical fiction. Let's break this down a bit. It's a literary genre where the story takes place in the past. Funny that. So historical fiction pieces of media capture the details of the time period as accurately as possible for authenticity, or verisimilitude, if you will. So this includes social norms, manners, customs, traditions. Many historical fiction stories tell fictional stories that involve actual historical figures or historical events. Okay, so that's what all of our shows do. Now, I'm taking all of this from the masterclass. You know that masterclass thing where you can like pay.
You can pay to be taught by Gordon Ramsay how to.
Yeah, exactly right.
Who did you
Choose
pay to
some
learn
toast.
about historical fiction?
Well, this actually you can just Google. It's just like part of their blurb. I guess is how they try and get you to buy the actual thing. But this
Could
was
we get on
actually.
there?
Oh my
And
God.
teach people historical anime
Masterclass
fiction.
historical anime fiction.
Yeah.
Welcome to my masterclass. No, this is actually Margaret Atwood. This is part of her masterclass.
Look,
Straight up-
that does check out.
Yeah.
If we're looking at, some famous works from Margaret Atwood, such as The Handmaid's Tale.
Exactly right.
Should get her on
she
the
doesn't
podcast.
actually get Margs on.
Heard she loves like Hero Academia. Like,
No, her masterclass isn't about historical fiction, but it's about writing in general. It's really cool. So historical fiction, as it is now known in contemporary Western literature, dates back to the early 19th century. So Sir Walter Scott is seen as the progenitor of the genre in the West, with novels like Ivanhoe, Old Mortality, and Rob Roy. So Leo Tolstoy is another who made the genre popular with his novels like War and Peace and Anna Karenina.
I'm surprised you haven't brought up Toy Story somehow in this
I thought he said
podcast.
Toy
What is he now?
Story a
Story,
second
it's here
ago.
now.
So you talking about Toy Story? You wrote Toy Story?
That is historical fiction. It's
That's
finer.
What differentiates historical fiction from a period piece, right? And this is a little bit nebulous and kind of a bit into nomenclature, I guess. Basically, the major thing is that the story is based on real historical events, but in which the characters are not necessarily real, and the minor events may not be historically accurate at all. Many stories in the genre are chiefly characterized by an imaginative reconstruction of historical events or persons. Perfect for what you're talking about
Yeah, true.
and mine too.
Because we fully had this argument when you pitched the episode. I was like, what does that mean? Like, is it anything that's set in the past? Like, is it anything that's set in a period piece? Because you could then say, like, pretty much most anime pieces, like, more ridiculous would be considered a historical
It's a good question.
fiction,
Exactly. Yeah.
but it's not.
Exactly right. This is why I actually went and researched the actual definition. When I pitched it, I was like, what the fuck does historical fiction mean? I'm like, well, it's like shows set in history. And it's like, well, that can be fucking anything.
Like,
Yeah,
is
we're all
Kenshin
traveling
historical?
through time.
Absolutely it is.
Like,
Yeah.
Kenshin is absolutely historical fiction. No question. It's a fictional character based on real events of history.
What
the major
about-
restoration, like,
Let's play this game where I yell historical fiction or not with Gateway to Anime. It's the worst game show ever. Go through our back catalogue.
But no, it's quite an interesting thing. A lot of war films, obviously, historical fiction. You know what I mean? Like pretty much all of them is a good example of what historical fiction.
Hang on, what are
looks
they
like.
based on? Sorry, I'm gonna be my bimbo status for this entire episode. But what if it's literally based on a real event? So say like something like Pearl
Dunkirk.
Harbor.
Well,
Dunkirk.
again, they're usually
That's just
unless
a
they're telling
period
a
piece.
dead true story.
Yeah. Well,
It's
I
still
mean,
historical fiction,
I don't think
right?
Pearl Harbor
Yeah,
by
but-
Michael Bay was necessarily
You're trying to tell me
entirely.
Ben Affleck wasn't at Pearl Harbor?
He wasn't
It
there.
might have been there. But I mean, it's about Pearl Harbor, so which did happen. So
Yeah, that's historical fiction. Perfect example of a bad example of a good movie. Good example of the historical fiction
you
genre.
mean good example of a bad movie.
Sorry, good example of a bad movie.
And I'll hold
Yes,
you
that
to
is
that.
right. Bad example of a good movie.
What?
No, a good example of
What are
a
you
bad
trying to
movie.
say here?
You're trying to say that was a
Okay.
good example, but it's a bad movie.
Good example.
It's a
Correct.
good
But a
example of
bad
what,
movie.
but it's a bad movie.
Yes,
Yes.
that is correct.
Unless
Why
you're
don't you
just
just-
really into Michael Bay, Ben Affleck, falling in love.
I mean, I'm into Kate Beckinsale, so
Oh, who isn't?
She was
watch.
great back in the day, huh?
She's immortal.
what
Yeah,
about?
like
She's
she's
still
like-
great.
She's like
I haven't seen her do
75
anything
years
for a
old.
while.
She looks stunning.
She's actually still looks hot.
What's
Yeah.
she done recently?
Heaps of. She's actually
She's
very,
had that-
very
she's-
successful.
Very prolific, huh?
Pete Davidson? I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's true. Pete
What?
David-
That's
yeah,
the
they
only thing I
dated for a
know.
bit.
Who hasn't that guy dated, man?
He just broke up with Kim Kardashian. So
I feel
who's
like
next?
I
Is
feel
it
like
me?
one of us is next.
I know. Gateway Anime, you're not safe from Pete
Yeah.
Davidson.
Okay, so look, 5 common elements of historical fiction. 1, setting, most important part of the genre. It should take place during an authentic period in history and be set in a real historical place. Number 2, plot. A combination of real events and fictional events. The author may invent characters, events, and cities, but they may still make sense to the time period. Characters. They can be real, fictional, or both, but they should all look, speak, and act in ways that accurately reflect the era. Dialogue must be authentic to the time period and should reflect the status of the characters who are speaking. Number 5 is conflict. The problems the characters encounter should be conflicts people of that era would actually encounter. So those are 5 of the key elements to make a historical fiction piece. I wonder when someone says like, is Jane Austen historical fiction or a period piece? Well, you're starting to blur the lines there. What does that mean? It's kind of like, what
No, it
is
was
a
written in
period?
the day it was set. So
Yes.
no, it's not.
It's
It's,
a period
actually it's now a classic, but I think it's a completely
Correct.
different genre.
No,
If it's
exactly
writ-
right. That is a period piece.
Like I just found that really funny. You forget that these classic authors were writing just in their own time. Pride and Prejudice. She was probably just like, this is a cute romance, like enemies to lovers, like trope, haha, like fanfic. It's not fanfic, but you know what I mean, like that kind of thing. Or it's the
Totally.
basis of many fan fictions.
Yeah, yeah.
Massively. Well, I mean, it's also interesting to consider, you write a period piece, just a period piece now to us looking back historically, but it was, written at the time of the author's context. But then you look at something like Shakespeare, right? Julius Caesar is a piece of historical fiction. It's all relative to the time and context in which something is made. It means it is consciously made in a historical setting to the context of the current author's time of writing it, right?
So if you stretch that out, in 100 years, people are going to be looking at Twilight as like some grand masterpiece.
It'd be a period piece.
It's
it
period
wouldn't be,
piece.
it wouldn't be
It
It
historical
actually
fiction.
is already
Like a
it's a
vampire story.
real snapshot of what it was like to live in the late early noughties.
That's an interesting thing you bring up, though, because it is like
Or
as time changes.
50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Which
that's
is a
dead.
Twilight fan fiction.
Or the
Yeah.
Twilight fanfic.
The reach that Twilight has, the fucking like the chokehold it had on our
What a time to be alive. Books about, I don't know, I never read it.
boy did I read
Robert
those
Pattinson.
books.
He's
Yeah.
killed it. What happened to Taylor Lautner, though? He disappeared.
Oh yeah, I actually was thinking about him the other day. Weirdly, it popped into my head. I was like, remember Taylor Lautner? I was like, I'm sure he's fine.
This is a very current podcast we're doing.
No, but like,
Kardashians, Taylor Lautner.
I know,
Pete
so weird.
Davidson.
We're supposed to be talking about history.
Let's get back into the history
I was
here.
thinking about Pete Davidson the other day, and I was actually like, no, genuinely, I was thinking about it. I
Okay.
went, I can't be certain that he's not one of my ex-boyfriends. Like, I can't be sure at this point. Has he dated everyone? Like, I don't know. And I'm like, maybe historically I dated
historically,
Davidson.
in a historical fiction setting. So as current as Pete Davidson happens to be, we need to talk about history. So let's talk a little bit about something which is pertinent to everything I just brought up. Decided to do a little bit of a different thing with Graham this time. Because we got you on originally as the manga guy, manga versus
I
comics.
think I was called Manga Boy at one point.
You were.
Like I should.
No, it was wasn't it a drawer?
I was a drawer.
You
I
were
was
a
also
drawer.
Manga Boy. Throw a cape on and fight crime. Yeah, like Ninja Star.
Yeah.
Ninja
One
Star.
Piece of people.
So instead of talking about an anime, because it hasn't been made into an anime, much to many people's chagrin, Graham, why don't you talk to us about your rather influential and extraordinary historical fiction piece of manga?
We're going off in a little different direction. Gateway to Manga Corner. But yeah, I'm going to talk about, I think, one of the seminal pieces of manga that's come out in the last 20 years. It was around for a long time. I'm going to talk about Vagabond by Takehiko Inoue, who, if that name sounds familiar to you, I think outside of Vagabond, his most well-known work is Slam Dunk, basketball, anime, juggernaut.
30-year anniversary of the Japanese Basketball League. They literally credited Inoue with being one of the major reasons that basketball was so popular in Japan. Straight up and down.
Vagabond started off in 1998 and has been on hiatus since 2015. And one of the major reasons of that is, I think maybe Inoue is probably burnt out on the medium, but he's a full-time basketball coach.
I
He
did
left
not
the
know
medium.
that.
That's his
Is
passion.
that why they were thanking him? Not because of his manga? They were like, thank
He
you for being
coaches
the
Japan?
greatest
Like,
coach
so good
of all time.
Such a good coach. Yeah, I think he just wanted to follow other passions, and one of them just happened to be basketball. So
Wow.
which is great. Like
That's dope.
Yeah, follow your dreams, kids. Another man who followed his dreams is the main character of this book. So the book is basically about Miyamoto Musashi, who I could spend podcasts and podcasts about going into this history. So I'll just give you like a version. So Musashi, he lived in the Edo period in Japanese history, which is like 1600s on the high times of samurai and shogunate and feudal Japan. We'll say feudal Japan.
A very real person too, obviously.
The manga is, like we said, historical fiction, so it is loosely based on his life. I wouldn't say it's beat for beat. The highlights are there. But Inoue he's considered as Japan's greatest swordsman. He developed a lot of techniques. He developed his own sort of martial arts using swords and dual wielding swords and all about swords. He's a great swordsman of the time period. But he's also a renowned philosopher. Sort of the last thing he did is he wrote a series of 5 books called the Gorin no Sho, which translates to the Book of the 5 Rings.
I have read that book, actually.
Yeah.
Fucking, all right, brag.
Yeah.
Humble brag.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
I also have not. So
It's actually really interesting.
I've never read Twilight, so.
oh,
Yeah.
shame
so-
on you.
History will judge
Yeah,
you.
I know.
You missed a cultural reset with that one.
50 years, my grandkids are going to run. We were learning the classics. Like, this one's going to werewolf. I'm like, oh, damn.
No.
I maybe read the Book of the 5 Rings. So the Book of the 5 Rings it's part philosophy, part martial arts. I think it's called kenjutsu, which is swordsmanship. So it's basically telling of his life, strategy guide, philosophy. It's all these sort of things.
Every chapter basically ends with, you must practice this every day. Forever. Like, that's
Yeah, pretty
basically
much.
how every chapter ends. It's like, and then you do this, and you must practice it every day
Yeah.
for the rest of your life. And you're
The
like,
rest of your life.
yeah, cool, man. Like, it's like, yeah,
And I
mate.
did. So that's good.
I'm now a master swordsman.
I can do everything. Oh, God. Living in the inner west of Sydney as a master swordsman.
Hey, Lewis, I've talked about this manga briefly on that samurai ninja episode, but I didn't give it enough credit, which is why we're doing it properly now. But yes, Lewis does own a katana.
Did I ever tell you about how my friends have a friend who got robbed in his house and he had Ichigo's sword replica behind his bed?
Giant.
And he
Zanpakuto.
grabbed it
Zanpakuto.
and he chased the robber out with the Zanpakuto. And she found the news article. Like,
That's
it's a fake sword, but he
hilarious.
actually grabbed it and
Zangetsu.
chased with a Zangetsu and chased the intruder out of his house.
Are you serious?
It's happened in the inner west of Sydney, like probably 10 years ago now. And this absolute weeb, had a replica sword of.
It was his time to shine. Like,
Yeah,
he's
he just
finally.
went
I've
panicked.
been waiting for people to break and use that.
Apparently the intruder just legged it. And
Yeah,
he
he
would.
ran
He knew the
up
power. Like,
He knew what was
He's
coming.
like, fuck, God. It's just
went at him.
That's the best story I've ever heard. There was a news article on it.
Just in the
guy
dark,
standing
you
there
just
like,
see that.
so
He's probably
good.
standing in his boxes. I'd be terrified.
I love that it's just a piece of tin, though. It's like the worst,
Oh,
like,
that's-
the
Oh, but you
replica.
can't take your chances. Like,
Obviously, the intruder probably didn't think anyone was home, but I like to think he was scared of the sword because he knew. I think
Oh,
I like
he
to think
knew.
that the
He
intruder
knew,
was
bro.
also a
He
fellow
knew.
weeb
He was
who
a
was
Bleach
like,
fan.
whoa.
well, this
okay.
this guy means business.
Yeah.
Ichigo's going to
I'm
fuck
out.
me up.
I'm out.
That's great.
Anyway, sorry, yes, Musashi.
So Vagabond is pretty much the story of Miyamoto Musashi. It starts off when he's a young sort of feral child living in the mountains, and it sort of like progresses through his entire life as he sort of travels Japan as a Ronin, facing different martial artists and different dojos and sort of honing his craft. It's sort of about, if you were to boil it down, it's probably about a story about growth in a way. It hasn't ended, but Musashi sort of is viewed as someone who sort of reached enlightenment through his martial arts
Yeah.
sort of background. And it's basically him becoming pretty much from an animal to a man. I can't really boil it down any more than that. He'll face different master disciplines which will frame his sort of view on the world.
He was a dojo breaker, wasn't he?
There's stories of Musashi, I don't know if they're true or not, where he would face off against 60 people by himself.
Never lost a
Um,
duel, famously.
Never lost a duel. He was also hired by Shogun at the time to like as a bodyguard. Basically boiling it down, that's what it's about.
Yes, probably the most famous samurai in history. It's about that. The seminal samurai piece, really, outside of Kurosawa and whatnot. But like, as far as the most
Yeah.
famous samurai and one of the most famous manga, and talk to us a bit about the art style, because the art style is quite exquisite, isn't it?
So the interesting thing about the artwork is that it's good from the jump.
Right.
So a lot of mangaka, like if you take
Mm.
Berserk for an example,
Mm.
like I own a lot of Berserk. The artwork up until the Golden Age arc, there's like flashes of brilliance, but there's also some really shit sort of stuff thrown in there. Like when he's drawn as a child, it's horrendous. But Inoue is like such a master of what he does that it is good right from the beginning. And then he just experiments as he goes on. Inoue, unlike a lot of mangakas at the time where they would use G pens, which are like really fine line pens, he would use menso brushes. So like
Right.
almost calligraphy brushes, which are incredibly hard to use.
Musashi was a calligrapher himself, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the menso brush is basically like a big loose paintbrush. You can do really fine detail with it, but you can also do like thicker lines. Inoue was saying that it's the reason he liked to do that is it added an unpredictable sort of element to his line work. It looked more natural, it looked more raw. When you're doing strands of hair, like it can be wild, it can be free, it can be natural because these lines are never going to be the same. Yeah, so the artwork is it's stunning. I think that's what kind of grounds it because you actually feel like you are in feudal Japan. Like everything is so detailed, everything is just so nuanced. And then when he wants to shine and he wants Musashi to appear more animalistic or wild, then he's got that brush technique, that style to make it seem ferocious. The artwork, I don't think that, I mean, Kentaro, when he's clips,
At his peak.
that stuff,
yeah.
that's probably the best. But I think for sort of a realistic, sort of grounded storytelling with incredibly detailed characters and facial expressions, I think Inoue's might be a bit better.
Really?
I think so.
Is it one of your favorite art styles of any manga you've ever seen?
Yeah. I like a clean sort of artwork.
Yeah.
I like precise lines. But even when he's using the menso brush and it is a bit wilder and a bit thicker, there's still like, there's a master at work there. It feels like a structure to it, but it also feels very natural. Yeah, I'd be hard pushed to find someone who has mastered that art form. From a character, just drawing people, I don't know. I don't know if there's anyone better.
And you
Is
love
this
the story
the
too?
reason why it hasn't been kind of like adapted in a successful way for anime?
I would say there's probably because it would,
Just
I
the
think
detail.
but I think there's other reasons. I think because we are talking about historical fiction and you're talking about younger people, they wouldn't click this link. It's in the same sort of vein. Like, how do you market like an epic like that to a younger audience? Because you're not going to have like, there's not going to be plushies of Musashi.
Sorry.
Right. There's just
There
not.
should be.
I mean,
That's a very good
That's a
point.
strong point.
but it's also it's a harder thing to generate money from.
Yeah, and it's a seinen, obviously.
Yeah, it's a seinen. It's an
piece,
adult
yeah.
story. I would have said probably about maybe 10 years ago, I'd be like, you can't do it. The art style But I think we've come a long way, and there's
The biggest complaint about the Kingdom adaptation is that they haven't been able to replicate the detail of the battles. Apparently, is like the
I'm
main
glad
thing.
you just brought up another very famous historical fiction manga and anime. Now it's funny you talk quickly. This isn't one of our three, but like it's something we should talk about quickly. But it's set in China actually. But I tried to watch the first episode of Kingdom because I was like, famously with Kingdom, stunning manga, stunning. And like those who are still watching Kingdom, like season 4 is out right now actually as we speak. It's in the summer 2022 season. Huge following. Those who know froth on it, right? Apparently the story is extraordinary. But I tried to watch the first episode. It is so unfathomably bad. Like I'm talking animation style, and it's famously so. Like that, it gets better. Apparently now it actually looks quite good. Not the same level of the manga, but like it just looks. It was like it's CGI. That CG, 2D thing. Honestly, I was watching the first episode and it literally started, and I actually went, "What?" Like I couldn't believe how bad it looked.
right.
And I was like, no, you just got to push through that first season. I was like, this is actually offensive.
I think it's interesting. All of those, the biggest criticism that people tend to have are from the mangas that are the most highly regarded for their beautiful illustrations and detail. So, like as we were saying, Berserk, Kingdom, those anime. I mean, I'm talking about Berserk when they redid it, not the original, which is how dare you bring up that? That's great.
97
So,
version's sick.
very, very good. It's unfair of us to expect that level of, detail from a production house that already probably have 6 animes on the go and are getting paid a minimum wage. Like we talk about this, it's not exactly
And
great
it's-
condition.
It's also interesting when you see in reverse, right? Like when Kimetsu no Yaiba, Demon Slayer, right? Decent manga, but my God, what Ufotable have done to elevate that. Even Jujutsu Kaisen, I would argue. Also, perfect example of a mangaka who got better as they went along is obviously Isayama, Attack on Titan. It starts off pretty rogue and
But the
looks
story's there.
pretty, it's brilliant. And also Wit Studio, I would argue they elevated that massively in the first 3 seasons
I
for
don't-
sure.
So and this happens when I read webtoons and memoirs and manga and anything. Because I'm not from an art, as in like from a visual art background. I can appreciate when something looks good and I like it, but it's actually not on my top things that I look for. I know a lot of people watch anime and go like, if the art style's not good or if they go like it's lazy. A lot of people like Naruto's lazy. Like they'll spend like they'll blow the budget on a fight and then they'll be like, a classic like exposition scene where it's just a background or a bird flying and they're like, here's the storyline. It's like a mouth flap over here. And I'm like, I don't care. But I remember I was watching it with a friend of mine and they were like, I can't handle that kind of animation.
Right.
Like, and I go on, which I could expect. I mean, you get things like Arcane that are flawless the whole way through.
Yeah.
And, Demon Slayer, all that stuff that now are. But to me, it's not high on my priority list. So it's interesting, probably is high on yours as someone
As a
who
drawer,
has.
It's 100%. Yeah, as a drawer.
Yeah. Is that like because I'd be willing to overlook bad art for a good story any day of the week.
Yeah, I'm the same.
I would absolutely take that.
No.
No? Yeah, no, and that's actually,
interesting,
that's
yeah.
incredibly
I
common
feel that,
as
but
well.
that's the beauty of anime. Like I read a lot of Jujutsu Kaisen, but I like the anime more because it's more visually interesting.
It is, yeah. Colors as well, of course.
Yeah, color.
Like a huge difference, of course.
Color, yeah.
Color grading, yeah.
But then I've read all of Naruto as well, and I really like Naruto's art style. And then I think the manga was, not the manga, the anime is pretty good.
Yeah.
There's some, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
there's some moments.
I think it's
like-
probably
The manga's
easier
even
with
pretty good too.
shonen. I think shonen stuff translates a lot easier. Seinen stuff.
From the sounds of things, like, I mean, I've read a bit of Vagabond, and yeah, it's just, you're right. It's the artistic vision that he's employing with, I don't know if it's the same style of brush that Musashi would have used. Probably they've obviously gotten better over time and whatnot, but it's similar. You know what I mean?
Could
Like,
be,
so
I don't
that's
know,
a whole,
yeah.
that's just a really aesthetic choice that, is using. It's a very artistic choice. You know what I mean? That's
Well,
very
a lot of
interesting.
that's done in computers now.
Oh, exactly right.
Like it's all digital, so it's kind of lost. I mean, you have brushes on thing, but it's night and day.
Yeah.
Like obviously, it is a high bar to jump to translate it into an anime, but I think you could get away with it. I just don't know if it was financially feasible.
It would have to be
Yeah.
Ufotable or UFO
Yeah.
Table or Wit or something.
Yeah,
And
Wit.
it's 350 chapters.
Yeah, fuck.
It's on hiatus. It's a historical fiction. Like it's
You can't make any money out of historical fiction.
I just don't.
We'll
it's-
see.
I just don't think it's.
This is our bet. We
I don't think
break
it's as
through in this
marketable.
episode.
That's the problem.
This episode's what absolutely makes
I
us
told you!
Spotify are like,
Yeah.
thank God, like we're offering you a deal. Sorry.
I don't know. I think it could be done. It would take a lot of people making no money.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's
You
always the
know,
case, unfortunately, in the anime
You would
industry.
need seasons upon seasons, and
Yeah.
I don't even think anime is kind of gearing towards that anymore. Like I think when you look at Demon Slayer, they're shorter seasons, they're higher production.
Yeah, I was amazed when Demon Slayer, because I was reading the manga when it ended. I was like, oh, you ended it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I thought you'd drag this out for like 5 more years, but no.
I respect that.
I respect it too.
Absolutely.
Tell a story and get out
Not
of the
a
way.
great ending, but better than Attack on Titans.
Also, the new, obviously, seasonal anime is now a thing. Before,
Yes,
when we
yes,
were
yes.
a bit younger, it was like anime that was ongoing continuously,
Yeah,
like
constant,
Naruto, constantly going. And the last one that I kind of there's heaps that still do that. I'm not like don't at me, I know, but I mean like the bigger shows don't do that anymore. The last one to do it was
Black
Clover, which actually, again, as I've said before, they caught up to the source material and they went, let's stop so we can wait for more material. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. I mean, I'm going to invent
do
a
that
whole new
anymore.
storyline
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not canon and ruin everything.
Those were the days. Anyway, let's move on to something else. I'm going to talk about a show that is, I think, rather criminally underrated. And speaking of some interesting animation choices, I'm going to talk about Golden Kamuy. Golden Kamuy is a manga series written and illustrated by Satoru Noda and was first serialized in Shueisha's Seinen manga magazine and Weekly Shonen Jump from August 2014 up until when it finished just in April 2022. So not long ago. First 3 seasons were produced by Geno Studio. The first season ran from 2018 to 2020, and the 4th season will air next season, which will be fall 2022, a part of the glut of extraordinary animes which will be airing in fall 2022. That's going to be a banging season. I can't wait to do that roundup episode. The last one was like, scrape to the bottom of the fucking barrel.
Yeah.
This next one's like, there's too many. It's extraordinary. Anyway, this is one of them. If you want to catch up, now is the time to get started. It's actually being taken over by Brains Base, who have done Baccano, Inspector, To Your Eternity, and my teen comedy Snafu.
Oh, all bangers.
Yeah, no, so I actually think this will actually elevate now that there's a new
if you haven't seen
studio.
Baccano, you need to watch
Baccano
it.
looks amazing.
It's so good.
I tried to argue it was historical fiction,
Baccano?
and Charlotte told me that it wasn't. It kind of is. It's on the
It's
borderline.
just set in a time period, but it's not like
It's fantasy.
there's like
it's not based off real
immortality
events.
and
So,
like there's not actually there wasn't
It is.
like a heist.
It's a historical period piece, I
It's a period
suppose, but
piece.
it's a period fantasy piece. So yes, you're right. It's not. It's not.
Good
And
show,
that's
though.
when we started arguing about like what historical fiction actually
Yeah.
meant, which is why I went and did that research. Because no, you're right. It's not historical fiction. But what is Golden Kamuy about? So Golden Kamuy takes place in the aftermath of the Russo-Japanese War. Historical fiction. So
Fucking hell.
You
Buzzword.
knocked that one out of the park, didn't you?
there it is, everyone. So you know. So it's primarily set in the Hokkaido region, which is obviously the North Island of Japan, and those surrounding. The series details the many real-life political, technological, and cultural developments of the era. Several key parts of the series, like the character Hijikata Toshizo, are fictionalized versions of real-life people and events. Hijikata was actually the former vice commander of the Shinsengumi, who were a special police force who served the Tokugawa shogunate and fought on their behalf during the Boshin War. This story gives specific focus to the Ainu people and their culture, exploring their language and the way they utilize all parts of nature to live harmoniously with the land. It's very much an indigenous kind of, not dissimilar to Aboriginal Australians' belief and Native American Indian belief, where it's all about harmony with the land.
Living with
you know?
nature and
Yeah, and like I think Shinto, elements of Shinto kind of, it gets a bit amalgamated, but we'll talk about that later. They live harmoniously with the land and they thank the Kamuy that they believe provide for them. So later parts of the story explore the various subcultures within the Ainu people and the hardships they suffered being caught between the territorial conflicts between Russia and Japan. The show also explores the horror of war, examining such themes as PTSD, survivor's guilt, virtues, ethics, and honor. The story follows Saichi Sugimoto, a veteran of the Battle of 203 Hill, where he earned the nickname the Immortal Sugimoto, due to his ferocity and the fact that he cheats death at seemingly every turn. Post-war, Sugimoto finds himself panning for gold in Hokkaido in order to fulfill his promise to provide for his dead war comrade's widow and child. Whilst panning, he is approached by a drunk old man who spins him a tall tale of lost Ainu gold that can only be found by following a map of tattoos, which are located on the bodies of a group of prisoners who escaped Abashiri prison. Laughing off the story is ridiculous. Sugimoto wakes up the next day to find the old man pointing his gun at him, saying he said too much. Overpowering the old man, Sugimoto pursues him into the woods, only to find him disemboweled by a bear. with a large map tattooed across his torso.
Prison break.
Kind of. Actually, yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
actually, they probably, anyway, the bear then attacks Sugimoto and he is saved by an Ainu girl named Asirpa. It's a tough one to pronounce. Asirpa. Asirpa. Sugimoto realizes the story is true and suggests to Asirpa that they pursue the gold together. Asirpa is uninterested in the gold, but wants vengeance for her father, who was one of the Ainu miners killed in the acquisition of said gold. So examining the body, they realize that the tattoos have seams, meaning that the prisoners were always intended to be murdered and skinned. It's pretty grim. So due to Asirpa's aversion to killing, she suggests they try and cooperate with the prisoners by convincing them to trace their tattoos when they meet up with them. They soon recruit Shirashi, an escape artist, thief, and convict who has been tattooed. Sugimoto and his ragtag group find themselves embroiled in a conflict with various parties who are also hell-bent on retrieving the gold. Primarily, the insane First Lieutenant Tsurumi, who's a great character, the insane leader of the 7th Division, who wish to use the gold to gain independence for Hokkaido from the mainland under Japanese control, and wage war against Russian territories. They basically want the Russo-Japanese war to keep going and gain independence. Also, the aforementioned Hijikata, touted as the last living samurai. So, due to the significant allure of the gold, as well as the duplicitous nature of the various parties, each group routinely forms uneasy alliances, which almost always end in betrayal, and they all vie to collect the tattoos that will lead them to the gold.
Such a good premise.
It's edgy, okay? I'm going to say it right now. It's an edgy show. Just the nature of like, so you got to kill and skin all these people and put it together to create a fucking skin map. Like
Flesh Atlas.
Look,
saying it out loud.
I back it.
Yeah, fuck it.
Honestly, it's actually really, I really like this show. Now, I will say the first season's a bit stodgy with the animation. The bear
is awful, man. The bear
bear.
is awful.
The first time you see the bear, I was like, what the fuck is that? Like,
That's
What does it look like? Is it like a
PlayStation 2,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
pixelated,
Oh, no.
like
It's like the bear from Tekken. Like.
honestly. It's not even doesn't
got
even
the
look bad.
salmon like?
It looks
Oh my
so
God.
bad. It's so funny. Like I remember being like, hold on, what the fuck's happening? Is this a joke? I actually thought it was a joke. I was like, this can't actually be happening. Like, so
Just draw a bear.
A bit like, just draw a bear.
Just draw a bear.
It can't be that expensive.
Yeah.
Like, anyway, so-
sorry, we've blown our bear budget. Bear budget's been blown.
It is so funny. So like, it's a bit like what people say with Kingdom, except Kingdom all looks bad. It's just this one
Just
element
one
of the
bear.
first season of Golden
Just the
Kamuy
bear.
where it's like, what happened with the bear? But look, it's actually really, really cool. The characters are fascinating. They're so interesting. Like I said, it's violent. It's edgy as fuck.
That opening is pretty violent when you see him in the
In the war.
war Russia.
It's
It's
hectic.
piles of bodies.
It is hectic.
Like, it's
But the immortal
pretty gruesome.
Sugimoto is a great lead character too,
Yeah.
because he's a fucking psycho. But the beautiful part of it is that like him and Arsipa actually have this really lovely relationship, and it never gets creepy. It's never weird, thank God. Which in some other animes it probably would.
You saw the bear and you were like, oh no, it's all downhill. What's going to happen next?
But it's like they become very much a father-daughter kind of pseudo relationship, and he actually really cares for her, and
Yeah.
she it's
Is he like the grizzly guy
Yeah.
and she's
Like
like,
a
the young
wolf.
girl?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
it like Logan?
yeah, actually yeah,
Oh,
that's
fuck
it.
yeah, it
In
is.
fact, 100% yes.
That is a real trope and a good
It
one.
is. It's a good one.
Like think about 11 from Stranger Things
100%,
and
and
like
Hopper.
and Hopper.
Yeah.
Like it's actually a real trope.
Yeah,
Oh, it
damaged
is.
man.
Damaged
learning to
grizzly,
love
like
again.
Yep.
taking a young girl under his wing in a non-creepy
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
It's actually like I really enjoyed this show. I along with Kaguya-sama when I was sick with COVID, I smashed both these shows. And like after I got over the bear, which took me a while, I was like
Just you in a fever dream.
And also
The bear.
because Kaguya-sama is so beautifully animated,
stunning.
yet the stakes are like not high.
No, exactly.
And yet you're dealing with like skinning and war and a bear, and you're like
samurais
what
and
the
like
fuck?
Russo-Japanese war. And
Yeah.
like, it's really cool. But also I just want to quickly talk about the Ainu people because I was actually fascinated. And a lot of the shows, what a lot of people both criticize and praise about this show is that it kind of its tone is all over the shop. So sometimes it's like hectic war, like skinning fucking people and putting them together to create a map.
Yep.
Fuck.
Yep.
Fucking random bears, which look like the most terrible things you've ever seen. But then also it goes, half of it's like when Asirpa is, she's obsessed with eating brains, loves animal brains, loves eating them. And it's a big running joke. It's like, Asirpa, how does that taste? She's like, the brain tastes nice with salt. And it's like,
Just deadpan
just
straight.
the deadpan, she lives for it. Like, and it's like, but it's the amount of times that like They all sit around together and make what would be a traditional Ainu people meal out of, like, they sort of use every part of the
use it. Eat
animals
the
or
bread.
that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
It's really cool. And they actually really, and apparently they're actually heavily, there aren't many Ainu people left at all. In fact, it's quite a sad
All right.
story. I'll get into this quickly, but like basically from what I understand, they actually got an academic to, I'm not sure if they're Ainu or not, but to consult with the mangaka about the, verisimilitude of the Ainu people customs, right? So a lot of it is really, sometimes you're like, am I watching an actual history show about the Ainu people? Like sometimes it just flips into that. You're like, where's the skinning?
Where's the bear?
Where's the bear? Bring it back. No, it's tonally does kind of shift all over the place, but like
No. sorry.
Gentle Ben.
Gentle Ben is in the show.
Gentle Ben looks better.
Sorry.
That's really funny. But let's talk about the Ainu people real quick before we move on. But like, so I learned so much just from watching this show. But Ainu people are the indigenous people of the lands surrounding the Sea of Okhotsk before the arrival of the Yamato Japanese. And the Yamato Japanese, they were the first clan that was officially set up on the mainland of Japan and widely regarded as the first and only dynasty that Japan's ever had. So, and also the Russians, of course, all around that sort of area between Japan, northern islands of Japan, Hokkaido. So these regions are referred to as Izo in historical Japanese texts. So official estimates place the total Ainu population of Japan at 25,000 today. Unofficial estimates place the total population at 200,000 or higher, as the near total assimilation of the Ainu into Japanese society has resulted in many people of Ainu descent having no idea of their ancestry at all. As of 2000, the number of pure Ainu people was estimated to be about 300 people. And in 1966, there were about 300 native Ainu speakers. And in 2008, only 100. So like, it's pretty brutal. It's a pretty brutal history. In fact, Hiramu Arakawa from Fullmetal Alchemist, she's from Hokkaido. She based the Ishvalans off the Ainu people.
All right.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of the influence there. Yeah, Ainu means human in Ainu language, and Kamuy means gods, divine beings. So gold and Kamuy, like gold of the gods, right? The Ainu also identify themselves as Utari, which is comrade or people. So they were a hunter-gatherer society, surviving from hunting and fishing, followed a religion which was based on natural phenomena, as I said. In 1869, Japan annexed Hokkaido, and in 1899, they forced the assimilation and took all their lands. And it's pretty brutal, actually. Like, it's a pretty, like I said, there's like 100, 300 left, you know what I mean, like officially. And so many people have no clue if they have Ainu lineage or what. Again, what I love about the show is that it's just like unashamedly like, this is the history of the Ainu people. I really like the show. It has some fucked up parts. I'm not going to lie. Obviously, it's already told you the fucking premise is fucked up. And there are some parts which are like, dip a bit too far. I think so 3 or 4 episodes I was like, oh, no, I don't know if I can do the show anymore. Then they got rid of that character, thank God, and it moved forward. And I was like, okay, this is actually a really cool, I don't know. I am really looking forward to season 4. It left on a real cliffhanger at the end of season 3. And it keeps changing. Again, everyone changing alliances all the time. And everyone's like, every character's got these really interesting backstories which you're not sure about. And it's like an onion which keeps getting peeled back. I love Golden Kamuy, apart from some of the flaws. I think it's a great show. You should check it out. And a great case of historical fiction. And you learn a lot about the Ainu people, which I knew next to nothing about.
Yeah, I've just learned a lot then. I'm going to watch it for sure.
Oh, you'd like it, I think.
I wonder if there's many other anime that explore that history.
I don't know of it, no.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Charlie, why don't you bring us home with yours, which is actually outside of Japan?
It is. Wow. We've got a non-Japanese historical fiction. I mean, so is Bakuno, if you were going to do that one.
If I was going to, yes.
Yeah, there you go. Actually, there's a lot of anime that's not set in Japan.
Tons.
Tons and tons and tons. You've got Monster, which is set in Germany. You've got...
Oh, massive. There's a theorist called Koichi Iwabuchi who has this theory of cultural odorlessness, which is that a lot of Japan's, unlike American cultural products, tend to be what he describes as culturally odorless. Now, we will unpack that in our Nature of Fandom episode, but it's quite an interesting thing because a lot of American the reason America has dominance of cultural hegemony, if you will, is because a lot of it is them parading their way of life to the world. It's actually a form of soft power, which they project onto the world, right? Japan is a bit more interesting, I think, in that a lot of what they do isn't actually promoting their way of life. It's actually very critical. Yeah. Even if you look at something like Studio Ghibli, right? Even though it's very Japanese, always set heavily, not always, so there's a lot of Porco Rosso, obviously,
Porco
you know,
Rosso.
there's many of the time, but Princess
House
Mononoke
Moving
and
Castle.
whatnot, whatever, you know, House Moving Castle, also European style, but like heavily set in Japan, but it's very critical of where Japan is going. And quite interestingly, Werner Herzog is actually doing a documentary on that. I can't remember his name, but he was like famously the last man fighting World War II. They found him on an island somewhere.
Oh,
He'd been
Oh,
there for,
yeah,
he'd
yeah,
been there
yeah.
for 30 odd years or something, just living in the jungle, still fighting World War II on his own. Very Japanese. But he returned to Japan after, you know, they found him. We're like,
Sort of
yeah,
similar,
bro,
yeah.
it's done. Don't worry about
Oh my
it.
God,
Come out
so
of here.
awful.
It was a fascinating story. And he went to Japan and was shocked by the society it had become. You know what I mean? And that's a common story of Japan. It's that constant, and obviously with the Ainu people here, like that the nature between the connection to the land and modernity, which was kind of forced upon them.
What's
And
the fastest modernization in history?
exactly right.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating. Anyway, I've diverged, but like it's interesting topic, and I think when you consider the cultural odorlessness, I don't think it's like most theories are not all correct, but there's elements of it which are. And again, so many times we see manga and anime making things set in Europe or ambiguous. Attack on Titan,
Yeah, Attack on Titan.
very
and
European.
Full Metal Alchemist.
Full Metal Alchemist,
Like, it's kind of
100%. It's really interesting concept
the,
to break down.
the nature of like comic books as well, or like anything animated, or like, you know, look at Airbender, which is a Western thing. It's
Yeah,
clearly
yeah.
inspired by. It's not like it's clearly inspired by many different places.
Oh,
around the world.
absolutely.
It kind of, I think that sort of goes hand in hand with.
Yet Marvel's very American,
Yes, of course. Yeah.
and DC as well. You know, like
Yeah. Whereas a
It's-
lot of other mediums.
It's American mythology at this point.
absolutely,
Mhm.
They're
absolutely, it
gods.
is
It's the gods of American mythology.
100%.
Um,
Anyway, sorry.
So I'm going to talk about something that goes in and out of fashion, I think, in terms of what people are into. It's very much in fashion currently.
Yes.
And you know what? I think Vinland Saga, which is what I'm talking about, which explores Vikings, might have something to do with that as well. I think that we have actually, just going to plug it for a second, a really great video on YouTube about Vinland Saga and The Northman, which is a great blockbuster film that just got released quite recently, and the similarities between them. And that goes into like, you know, just like why they're similar, why they're popular. Like it's actually, it's pretty good stuff. So check that one out. But anyway, Vinland Saga is an anime adaptation of a very famous manga, once again, animated by Wit Studio, who are famously very, very fucking good at what they do. Season 2 is being animated by honestly, the rival to Wit currently,
who
which
just-
is Mappa, who are
Opposite
killing it.
ideology though, who do everything, whereas Whittle like enough.
Wit are famous for dropping huge IPs. Like they're kind of like, we did season 1, it was really good. We're going to do this other thing now. And you're like, what? Anyway, so Vinland Saga is definitely a historical fiction.
Oh yes.
Like 100%. Although it does follow actual historical figures, similar to Vagabond. So just a very, very vague synopsis, which I'm going to give, is Thorfinn pursues a journey with his father's killer in order to take revenge and end his life in a duel as an honorable warrior and pay his father homage. And then, yeah, basically that is it. So, and then the other one is a young man named Thorfinn finds himself in a quest for revenge against his father's killer. So
Very concise.
that's an absolute spoiler of
Very
the first
concise.
3 episodes or 5 episodes.
Yes.
But I think it's pretty obvious when you watch it. Thorfinn is just getting started, obviously. True story. Vinland Saga, as some would say, is
We're about
North-
to find out.
is North America. So we're following real Vikings. So Vikings, obviously, as you were saying, Vikings mean literally translates like to take, that kind of Scandinavian.
Yeah,
like-
it's you go Viking.
the verb.
It's a
right?
it's a
Yeah.
loose term for Scandinavians that went out into the
Maraudering.
ocean, exploring, marauding, pillaging. stuff.
Marauding?
So we're
Marauding.
dealing with
Marauding.
Sorry, yes.
a bunch of characters who are ruthless, you know,
Oh.
pillaging, raping.
It's a
like,
brutal show.
Full on.
Slaving.
Like, and
Yeah,
it doesn't
everything.
shy away from this. So trigger warnings, content. Actually, all 3 shows, obviously, content warning here.
Yeah. Because history's, you know,
Yeah.
it's interesting, not fun a lot of the time.
Absolutely not.
Pretty
Yeah,
brutal.
sometimes
We
you
have a
just
brutal
gotta-
history, people.
Just gonna peel a man's back.
it's
gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
So one thing, Vinland Saga takes place and it spans a bit of a wide storyline with our main character Thorfinn, who you meet when he's a kid with his father, who is a great Viking warrior, famed, but has run away from his life to start a family in a small island. Not a small
Iceland,
island,
isn't
it's Iceland. So we're somewhere where it's like, it's not small, but it's fucking cold. And
Yes.
he's just like, no one's going to come here because, you know, you can't really, like, honestly, they arrive by boat. They're Vikings, you know.
But it ain't easy.
But it's not
No,
easy.
not easy.
So one day he's tracked down and his like past catches up with him, and his father agrees to go and fight a war there with England.
For the king.
Yeah, for the king. They're fighting with the King of Denmark against the King of England. He agrees to go under the pretense they'll leave his small, quaint village alone, right? But little does he know his little son, Thorfinn, has snuck his way onto the ship.
That scam.
A classic move.
Classic
Classic
scam.
move.
Standard.
It's going to end in tears. We all know it. Anyway, I'm going to spoil it because honestly, if you watch it, like it's just, I think it's pretty obvious from when you turn it on. You're like, oh, I wonder if this lovely Viking man is going to die. Yeah, he's going to die.
He's a
It's gonna be
father in an
brutal.
anime. Of course he's not going to make it. Like,
Truly. And he's like found peace, of course not. Like
He's
but
seen the error of his ways.
that's the setup. So the very first part of the season is actually, kind of like just a background for what the main part of season 1 is about, which is the relationship between Thorfinn and Askeladd, who is the killer of Thorfinn's father. And fuck, it's an interesting relationship because he has respect. It's a mucky one, and like he is.
It is a mucky one.
Askeladd
Very
is like a classic, like you sort of like. Why do I like him?
Oh, everyone likes him.
Yeah, like you're kind of like, oh no,
But he
like
also sucks.
he's just a completely like, one of those characters who is absolutely corrupt as fuck.
Oh.
Manages to lead this thing, but he's charismatic and smart and calculative and plays the game very well. So he's the kind of anti-hero, not hero. He's an anti, like, I don't know. He's like a pretty much a protagonist.
He's sort of a deuteragonist, yeah.
yeah,
He's,
deuteragonist. is the word.
Deuteragonist.
deuteragonist.
What a word.
Good
Yeah,
word.
it's a one, yeah. He's an interesting character. Look, the whole first season really is predicated around the relationship between Thorfinn and Askeladd because this kind of becomes his father, but also like he hates the fuck out of him because he killed his real father. And like he's also got his own agenda. We can't spoil any of that, but like he's a very interesting character within the political system of the Vikings and the king and whatnot. And it's like it's a really good show. It's and the second season is about to come out. Looking good. Everyone now. What's interesting here as well, both your shows have these huge arcs. The next one in the season 2 is what many people refer to as Farmland Saga in Vinland Saga, where basically won't spoil much, but he spends a lot of time on a farm, not doing very much.
Funnily enough, the last arc in Vagabond is farmland as well.
Exactly. He goes and helps a village plant
It's
trees.
farm.
Incredibly
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. I kind of like it when anime does this or manga does this or Japanese storytelling kind of slows the pace.
Yeah.
On a really like, hectic show and all the stuff going on and they just go, let's dial it back.
let it
Let's
breathe.
get slice of life for a minute here. It's quite interesting.
And it
like I
makes
say,
the
Kamuy
impact.
does the same sort of thing with the, them just hunting things and talking about cooking.
Yeah.
Like it's
It really makes the impacts of when big things do happen, which they do. All 3 shows are talking about are dealing with wars. So if you had just that all the time, you wouldn't have a chance to like realize what people are fighting for. All 3 of them are based off famous manga that can take the chapters to do that. And I think the anime hopefully will follow suit. Like it's hard with pacing. That's like the biggest kind of problem when adapting from a manga. But Vinland Saga though, it just looks beautiful. The characters are amazing. There's also a really interesting relationship with the king of Denmark's son,
yes, Knut.
Knut, who is like upon sight, you're like Griffith, like
He does
that's a Berserk reference.
Not like him,
not
though.
even slightly like Griffith, but you're kind of like, what is this like relationship where like with the characters are all really well flashed out.
Yeah, I love Thorkel. He's my favorite.
Oh, Thorkel's lit.
Thorkel's lit character.
Like this huge, like
the ultimate warrior, but like, Thorfinn's father was the ultimate warrior, and Thorkel was like his, Thorkel like idolized Thor's.
Yeah.
and also
it's
his
a real person. Thorkel's a real character.
and
in
his
history. Not
entire
based off one.
like his entire character drive is just that he wants to fight the strongest opponent.
Yeah,
That is
classic
the whole
anime
thing,
trope.
classic
Yeah,
anime,
classic.
but like it's very fun to watch that unfold because you're kind of like, why is he siding with England?
Yeah, he starts off against the Vikings because he's bored.
Yeah,
And
he was
wants
like,
to,
we're gonna win, so I'm gonna fight with the other
Yeah,
side.
fine.
And then it's actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's great. Look, I loved Vinland Saga. I when it came out, I was all about it. It's one of those shows you can recommend to people who aren't into anime.
Honestly, it's a great gateway. And I was saying
Big time.
it actually isn't even doesn't have many anime tropes at all. If I was going to recommend a bunch of things to people, I would say if you like action war, if you like Viking things, obviously.
Like the
but
show
like,
Vikings.
if you love Vikings, you like Northmen, like if you are kind of into that, even like Game of Thrones, I would say close.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that kind of action character development, like big thinking war, like kind of epic.
It's great.
I think that most people would like it, even if you're not into anime, for sure. I think I forgot that. I reckon that now might be like number 2 on my list of things I'd recommend, even above Attack on Titan, which still has anime tropes in it, pretty hardcore.
Yeah, that's true.
I think you have to wrap your head around a lot. I think Vinland Saga, there's not really a fantasy element. I mean, yes, you've got big warriors who lift entire boats and throw them.
Yeah, people do ridiculous things.
Like, you're
but
like,
there's no
okay.
superpowers.
Yeah,
There are
yeah.
people who are way stronger than human beings ever been in the history of the world.
it's heightened, but like,
Apart from that,
yeah, but they're not shooting fireballs. And
Yeah,
shit. They're not
it's-
turning
it's
into giant monsters.
definitely
Yeah.
heightened, but it's not fantasy. And I
Yes.
think that you learn a lot. Like I learned that Vinland is North America. And I learned that Iceland
History,
is
kids.
Iceland. So there you go. But also
History.
just the war between the Vikings, Scandinavian Vikings, and England.
like most of the royal family have lineage back to the Danes. Like the Vikings basically took that place. Like they really dominated the shit out of. Historically, Denmark, the Vikings, they smashed England, man. Like it's like crazy. Like it's really interesting. I didn't.
And I'm like, spoiler alert, because I history. That's the problem with this show. Is you're like, oh no, history.
Spoiler for history.
Like,
Spoiler
on
history.
Wikipedia. But yeah, obviously, like thinking about how the whole show is about the promise of going to Vinland. Like they're talking about that. Obviously, the Vikings didn't really take over that for long.
No.
So I'm like, where's the lack of success story there? Which is good, I think. I'm kind of like,
Probably a good thing. But
I mean, God, someone else got there, so fucking hell.
yes.
What's going over there right now?
Yeah, I'm like, well, no, I'm not saying no. Everyone should have left it alone, is what I'm saying. But I think
I agree.
it is an interesting, like, historically, you're kind of like, all right, cool. This is something I didn't know a lot about. My idea of Vikings is very much set in a fantasy setting. Things like Thor and that kind of like that.
Or Odin, was actually someone they literally believed in. We talk about this in our video. Actually, you can look up on YouTube.
And we talk about on Titan and the influence from Norse mythology quite intensely,
Big
and
time
how
as well.
that is hugely influenced by it. So.
Massively.
Yeah. But honestly, Vinland Saga is a truly excellent show that I'd recommend. Wit Studio smash out of the park. Mappa will do a good job as well.
They will.
If they haven't got too much on their bloody plate.
Who knows with Mappa?
Mappa, man.
Never ends.
What a grind.
They're like, more is
Every
more.
show.
Yeah.
There's so many shows.
What are
Well, they're
some-
doing the big 3. What are they called? The Dark Trinity?
Dark Trilogy.
They're doing all 3, aren't they?
Yeah.
Jujutsu Kaisen, which by the way, they
Chainsaw.
smashed. They smashed Jujutsu Kaisen.
Hell's Paradise.
That's
Hell's
put them on the
Paradise
map,
coming
I'd
out. But
say.
also.
Put them on the Mappa.
Oh, but also Chainsaw Man. At the time of recording this podcast, the trailer came out just a little while ago. It looked good.
So good.
It looked really good. I hope it looks that good throughout the show.
Some random bears just coming and ruining our fucking
No, Ben, no.
No!
Oh my God.
ruined it again, Ben.
What are some other historical fiction anime that you'd recommend?
Good historical fictions. I mean,
Hang on, would you say Fate Zero? Because they bring up some.
Look,
they're myths, they're mythology.
they're myths. You can't call historical fiction.
No,
I
they're basically Pokemon World's Greatest Warriors.
Pokemon historical
What?
fiction.
Pokemon
Gacha
historical-
game as
Yeah.
well. Like,
mean,
which had actually gone to
Some of the warriors are based on.
They're all based
They're
on
all
historical
based on
figures.
real things.
But yeah,
But they're
that
about
just
summoning fantasy warriors
That-
to fight for the Holy
Yeah.
Grail. which is a
you can't
historical
prove to me
piece.
that didn't happen.
That
I'm
is
sorry.
great.
I suppose
Like
actually,
you.
the burden of proof is on me.
God, there's going to be a whole list of things that we're forgetting.
Oh, there's
So many. There's there's a lot of anime that are
Rurouni Kenshin is absolutely historical fiction.
absolutely.
piece.
Oh,
Like,
how would you feel about Samurai Champloo? Because that is based on that's a tough one because it's
oh,
not.
Yeah,
one of your
that's-
points I thought about this. One of your points was that people have to interact and speak like they are from the
Yeah.
era, which
Yeah.
they do not do in Samurai Champloo.
They're breakdance fighting.
But the rest of it is set
yeah,
very
that's what
much,
it
and
is.
it's not like necessarily that fantasy heavy.
That's a borderline one, actually. That's
Yeah.
a good. That's a good. That's a good shout. I laid out all the points before about what constitutes historical fiction, but like there are some things that blur the lines. You know what I mean? Like Gintama is obviously a
Technically,
not
yeah.
a historical fiction show, but it has elements of it.
Take the aliens out.
Take
of
the
it.
aliens out.
Yeah.
But again, it's a metaphor for Japan being invaded
Yeah,
by
yeah.
the West, right? So like there are elements there, but it's certainly not, you could never call it a historical fiction show, obviously. But like it is based in elements of history. But no, it's not historical
There's probably
fiction.
some huge anime staring us right in the face as well.
Yeah, obviously I think we've covered 3 pretty big, heavy hitting historical fiction
And
shows.
something to read for once.
Yeah, something to read.
Read books, kids.
Read the book. Study history and read books, goddamn.
Get off your
I
TikTok.
study some history.
Unless you're subscribed to our TikTok, then get back on TikTok.
Yeah, get back on TikTok. Follow us. Well, look, I think we've covered 3 really cool, interesting historical fiction shows. I hope that I've broken down a little bit what historical fiction actually means as a genre, as opposed to a period piece or as opposed to a fantasy piece. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, all like any Akira Kurosawa film is obviously historical fiction, of course. You know,
Yep.
Seven Samurai, obviously, Yojimbo, anything like that. So it's all around us. Again, you see it everywhere. Like Tolstoy wrote almost
Yep.
exclusively historical fiction, any war film. So it's
Twilight in 100 years. Wait, just wait.
when it becomes a seminal piece of
I
history.
mean, I'm thinking actually of like Bridgerton. Does that count?
Well,
Because that is it's like that is interesting because that is a Regency era romance, but it's like, it's not necessarily, I reckon it kind of
because
is.
you can't call it. That's when you get the like, is it a period piece? It wasn't written in the time period. It is historical in the context in which it is written. So
But
it's
it's not based on
obviously-
real people
but it's
or
not
real
based
events.
on real people.
Is
But
that
they-
what makes it technically? I
Yes.
guess history is the main point here, right? It has to be a
Yes.
historical moment, historical
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
The Great?
The Great is absolutely
Oh,
historical
100%.
fiction.
And
Yeah.
and also
Absolutely.
the favorite, the great, all,
Yeah.
of, all
Favorite
of his stuff. Yeah.
historical fiction. But in anime, I think we've nailed the 3, what I think are 3. There are others, of course, but I think these 3 are really, really cool. And again, 2 of which based heavily in Japanese history and 1 of which, of course, based in European history. Really, really cool. So there you have it. That is our historical fiction anime episode. I hope you learned something. And if you want to check out some of these shows, look, all 3 read or 2 watches. So cool. Gon Kamuy season 4, cannot wait. Honestly, you guys should watch. You've watched the first season, haven't you?
Watch the first.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I'm watching it for the bear.
Only for the bear.
Just come
I'll
yeah.
turn it off after. I'll be like,
Yeah.
after the bear is work.
It's been
Sometimes
done.
after the bear. Like,
I can't.
You won't believe how bad the bear looks. It is hilarious. Kingdom is another one we mentioned before.
Kingdom.
Obviously a big one, but again, I think the bear's bad. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We would very much like to thank our patrons, as always, and of course, Grant, Stuart, Rose, Dom, Caroline, Alex, and Samantha. Oh, and Christian. We appreciate it so much. You can, of course, look us up on all of our social media platforms, which are predominantly Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, or you can head to our website at www.gatewaytoanime.com for any of our new news and goings on. Thanks so much. We really appreciate it. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
See you soon.